Hello everyone. This is the continuation on WxPython tutorial series, how to develop graphical user interface using WxPython. This is the sixth video on this tutorial series, and this tutorial series is video is all about debugging Python using Eclipse platform with Pydev plugins. So this is the continuation of a previous episode, what we talking about object-oriented programming and the issues with multiple inheritance and why single inheritance should be typically used for even for production or commercial use. So this episode is all about is debugging. So as you can see, we have a outline here, outline tab. The outline tab which actually tells what is the class and what is the function. So as soon as you click the project class 1 in the outline tab, you can actually see it gets highlighted in the code, which is .py file. So you can click in it, comes to init, and just do self-1, self-2. So this outline which actually helps to directly access the variable or a class or a function, so that it speeds up debugging process, which improves productivity and efficiency of the programmer rather than scrolling the entire file, because in the production type of environment the .py file might even have few thousand lines. So debugging a few thousand lines file can become very cumbersome. So to the first step, when it comes to debugging, the outline actually helps in order to access the variable, the function, or the class directly just by clicking it. So this is the very first step when it comes to debugging. The next most important step when it comes to debugging is the breakpoint. So the Pydev has a built-in debugger which is tightly integrated into this Eclipse IDE. So in the previous please check the previous tutorials with respect to the installation of Pydev, where it installs into the Eclipse IDE library, more like the plugin. So we have a Pydev menu here, and we just have a global browser. So if we want to really check, for example, if there is any variable into the file, so you can actually see if you type what is here, and it tells it is there in project.1, which is the module name. Dot is the extension in the module name called proj1, which is actually just the directory in the hard disk. So the check WxPython is actually the file, so it becomes the part of the object oriented using the word called dot. So it will tell all the entire hierarchy of the variable called var2. So this is the second part. So now let's get into the breakpoint. So let's open proj file 1. So this was the file that has been used to talk about the object-oriented features of Python programming language and its inheritance, and why single inheritance should be generally used for even for production release or commercial software development using Python. So the next step is how to use the debugger. So as you can see, there are two important buttons here in the menu. One is known as the run. So as you can see, the button tooltip is actually telling what exactly it is. So this is the debug button in the menu. So if you press the debug button, so what all this happens, just have a look at it. So if you come to the right hand top corner, there are few more buttons, which is known as the perspective view of the Eclipse IDE. We are in the Pydev perspective view, and this is a bug-like image which is embedded in the button, which tells the tooltip called debug. So if you press the debug, you will actually come into the debug environment. So debug environment actually opens up a few more windows than just the tab, which is the proj file 1, which is actually displaying the .py file contents, which is this one. So as you can see, this already run it. because we don't have any breakpoints here. So if you just click the debug button, and the debug button actually opens the perspective view of the debugging environment, which is right now. Because we don't have a breakpoints in the file, so we have to click the perspective view, which is there on the right hand top corner, which has the bug kind of image embedded in the button, and the tooltip is saying debug. So as you can see here, this is the breakpoints will tell how many breakpoints which is there in the checkpoint button. So we'll just breakpoints in the file of this one. Actually, this breakpoints is I was using some other file for the previous tutorial, like tutorial number 2 video. So this is actually displaying the breakpoints which was there in the tutorial number 2. So we'll actually come back. So how to come back to the perspective view of the coding of the Python? You come to here and click Pydev thing, so you'll come back to the perspective view. So how to switch perspective view between the typing and the run, typically known as the run, which is the Pydev, and debug, which is the debug. So how to check whether we have a breakpoints or not? You check on the left hand side of this editor, of the text editor. This is the text editor, this is the package explorer, this is the outline, and this is the console. The console where all the print functions, when the print function of the Python executed, all the contents will be displayed in the console here. So this is the project explorer, which is typically known as the package explorer. For Python it is known as the package. In the hard disk it is just a directory, and this is the outline of the file that has been opened. So it will show all the class functions and its associated variables with namespace. So as you can see, where the variables are declared, that will tell the namespace validity. And remember the word called self, it declares the variable to the entire scope of the class, not the file, the class. So you can have multiple classes, as we already have here. We have 2 classes, the inherited class and the super class. So this is the super init, which is actually invokes the project class 1 as the super class to the inherited class, which is the inherited class as the class name. So let's start with debugging. The very first step when it comes to pure debugging is to place a breakpoint. So let's place a breakpoint here. So as you can see, there's a green dot, and the Pydev says this is the breakpoint. And how to go into debugging? This is the bug-like image that is put into the button. So just click it. So it will take a few seconds for the debugger to start the debugging. The Pydev does it automatically. Now we have the debug perspective view is actually opened. So as you can see on the right hand top corner, there's a bug like button which is actually enabled. So this means that we are actually in the debug environment, and if the Pydev button is actually inactive, that means we are in the run perspective. So debug perspective, we will have a lot more buttons, I mean lot more windows opens here. There's also a task which is open. So this tutorial series is with respect to WxPython graphical user development using Python, and explaining going into the very deep explanation of debugger is out of the scope of this tutorial series. We'll try to cover some of the good salient points of debugging when we have a tutorial series of Python specific, typically Python 3 in the future. So but please be aware of that this tutorial series is on WxPython. This is just a brief introduction of how to use the debug feature of Eclipse for Python development. So there's a few more buttons here highlighted in the red. So if you come to the button, this is known as the terminate. So if you click that button, the debugging is terminated, and we can go back to the run perspective without having any issues with respect to how the windows are displayed here in the Python Eclipse IDE. So let's go to debugging again. So as you can see, there's a var1 value is already displayed here, because this is coming from this print statement, and the breakpoint, the debugger has stopped in the breakpoint which we have placed, which is at the print init var1. init var1. So there are few important buttons in the menus to be pressed, which is the step into, step over, and step return. The step return finally returns the program back to the debugger, meaning the debugging has been done typically. Step into is you can place multiple points, breakpoints, and you can go from step into is more like going statement by statement, and if the statement actually calls a function, it goes to the function, then goes through the statements of the function, and there is a return from the function. It comes back wherever the function returns and goes to the step by step of the subsequent class itself and to the entire program of the file, or the entire project also you can go, depending upon how the call is made, like class instance, and then the class instance will call a function. The function will have the statements to execute in the function. So you can go step by step for the entire project. So we have placed only the one breakpoint. So let's go step into thing. So it comes back to the return of the Python, which is actually this depending upon the encoding. So this is the Python specific installation file. So just exit it. So because we have only one breakpoint, the entire thing has been executed. So this is the red box which is known as the terminate. So if you press it, it terminates the debugging. There's also here also on the right hand bottom corner to terminate. So let's come back to the run perspective. Let's place few more debugger points, and let's invoke the debugging again. So this statement executes because there is no debug point. So this statement will not be executed when you press the debug button because we have a breakpoint here. So let's step into the next and see how it goes. So this is some other file encoding. So debugging has already fixed. So how to start a debugging again? So once you have issues on debugging, you can start the debugger again. So let's this time. So it has come here. So we have placed additional debuggers here. So we'll just go to step over. So it executes step by all the important steps. It actually executes. So this is the most interesting debugging button, which is known as a step over. You can actually step over all important statements. So you can see which class has an instance, which class is calling what function, whether it's inherited. Now actually is in the super statement, because this is a inherited class which is inheriting plus class 1. So step over says this is one of the important steps of the entire file. So if we step over, it comes to the instance of the single inherited class, then we to step by step. So then now it comes to the second breakpoint. So as you can see, the few more values have been printed now because the var2 has been printed from this statement. So this is one of the typical way of how to use the debugger, which will actually explode. So please be free to put any number of breakpoints you want and use step over, which is more important. So if you press step return, it returns the most important return of the function. So you can keep on pressing the step into. So whenever it's a breakpoint, the breakpoint will be utilized by the debugger and it stops there. So return is always returning the entire function, because every function will have a return statement. Though we don't write any specific return because we don't have any return type for this call function, meaning return void in the sense, but there will be an implicit return for every function, and finally even to the class. When the class goes out of scope, the program when the Python interpreter is executing, there is a default return, but we don't see explicitly in the code. When we want a explicit return, we can have an explicit return to the function. So I will talk about maybe in the next episode a little bit basics on the function return and its usages. So this this video is all about debugging. So this is one of the standard way of how to use the debugger. Feel free to use this step into, step over, and step return. But remember, step return actually returns the entire function, or even returns the class when the class goes out of scope, when the Python interpreter is actually executing the function, executing the entire file or project by the Python interpreter. So the debugger interacts with the Python interpreter, and the Python interpreter is actually executing the entire project, or typically one file. We have only one file because we have a main defined in this file itself. So this is for the entire project. This is the file that only runs because we have the main there. It won't run all the files. Doesn't matter how many files there in the project, it won't be executed because the main function, whichever the file has the main function, that is the main file. So that is the entry point for the Python interpreter. So the user or the developer can actually, programmer can actually explore the salient features of the debugging features provided by the Eclipse Pydev plugin for the Eclipse IDE. So you can always terminate the debugger here and come back to the perspective interactive bug. On the right hand top corner, you just click the Pydev, you come back to the run perspective, so you can always run the program without the debugger points actually coming into the way of the execution. So you can actually see how many files you can have. Even the debug option, you can change from Python run to Python unit test when you write unit test for Python. So but this tutorial series is all about WxPython, so it's our style, and all this explaining debugging features or unit tests is out of the scope of this presentation. So please stay tuned for WxPython graphical user interface development using WxPython and writing pure Python code. So I will end this video here. Please stay tuned for the subsequent WxPython series coming for graphical user interface for Python using WxPython from ulsisoft.com. Thanks for watching. Bye.